The history we know, in major part, is a set of paradigms, understatements, distorted and often impossible to verify truths, because of the lack of irrefutable proof confirming or denying certain theses. The story of the birth of gods and goddesses throughout time, including ancient Artemis, is not an exception. In order to try to understand the complexity of the subject, we have to venture out into the past. Since the invention of alphabet around 3300 BCE, stories, events, rituals, gestures or activities connected with religious practices were passed down from generation to generation, either by the means of spoken words or by imitation, and thus it is not and cannot be a reliable source of information. Another challenge in case of religious cults is strictly subjective perception of spiritual world, so characteristic for their followers. In a broad sense, religion is a set of syncretic beliefs of similar lineage, having a lot in common with one another. Since their early beginnings, humans believed in forces a lot stronger than themselves. We can only assume that one of the first worshipped gods, which was greatly feared, was fire. Thus, one of the most important goddesses in the Roman Empire was Vesta, being the sacred guardian of the hearth and home. Prehistoric religious cults were characteristic for small tribal groups of hunter-gatherers. Thus, one can assume that small figurines as personifications of deities protecting their owners from evil forces were treated as insurance policy of some sort in case of lurking danger. The Paleolithic figurines of Venus, dated 40 to 20,000 years, are a perfect example. The figurines were primarily made of bones, horns or stone. The best known is Venus of Willendorf. Some scientists suggest that these figurines are the representation of a goddess of fertility, home and hearth, as well as protectress of women in pregnancy. The same features were attributed to female deities all throughout human history. It is no surprise, as one of the conditions of survival of a species is giving birth to offspring. Much later, 10,000 years ago, in ancient Syria, the first human Neolithic settlements started to flourish with their domesticated farm animals like cattle. Trade began to develop. Kubaba, a Syrian female deity of that time, is claimed to have been worshipped, but little is known about it. Some scientists believe that Kubaba, which was recognized as goddess by Hurrites in Syria and later in the Hittite Empire, evolved into Greek Kybele of the Mycenaean period. "3,000 years ago in Neolithic period, Phoenicia, a land lying on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, flourished. Later, these areas became Lebanon, western Syria, and northern Israel. In time, Phoenicia became strongly influenced by the Kingdom of Babylon, and up until the year 1100 BCE, it remained tightly interconnected with Egypt, being at the peak of its power. Bearing in mind that in ancient world, polytheism was a major religious force, it seems probable that various cults and beliefs, by mixing together, evolved into another ones of different nature. The most important Phoenician deities were Baal Shamin, the Lord of Heavens, and Astarte. One of Baal's attributes as a solar deity were sunbeams around its head. In modern times, the patron saints of many religions are depicted in a similar way. The symbol of their sainthood is the halo placed around their heads. Astarte, as well as Venus of Willendorf, was the personification of fertility and, as later Artemis, the goddess of the moon. Named the Queen of Heavens, Astarte was worshipped in Egypt as well, but was also the goddess of war and identified with Babylonian and Syrian goddess Ishtar and the Sumerian goddess Inanna, the Queen of Heavens. The kingdom of Phrygia flourished in Anatolia, where modern Turkey is today, between 1200 and 700 BCE, and it was in Phrygia where Cybele, the goddess of fertility, blooming and defensive cities, was worshipped. Named Magna Mater, Cybele was also the guardian of the dead. Her cult, present throughout millennia in Asia Minor, exerted there its influence to die out in the Roman Empire as late as the 5th century AD. In the Phrygian city of Pessinunte, in the sanctuary of Cybele, there was once a black piece of rock as a symbol of the goddess. Most probably, it was a piece of meteorite covered with silver, having the shape of a female. In the 7th and the 6th centuries BCE, the cult of Cybele came to Greece, where the deity became the mother of gods, and in the 2nd century BCE, Cybele started to be worshipped in Rome as well, in the Temple of Victory on the Palatine Hill. Cybele had a few features in common with Artemis. She was depicted sitting on a throne, the crown of the city walls on her head, and her attributes were the horn of plenty and a lion. The festival of Cybele lasted from the 4th to the 10th of April. Great shows and horse competitions took place in Circus Maximus. Most probably under the influence of Ionian civilization, around 2000 BCE, both cults of Cybele and Artemis became one. Artemis was the goddess of contradictory features. In Greeks, she was the great hunter, the goddess of animals, forests, mountains and plants, the goddess of fertility. It was her who helped women in pregnancy and in birth. Similarly to Phoenician Astarte a few thousand years earlier, Artemis was the goddess of the moon and death. Thus, one of her features was cruelty. In some places, human victims or wounded animals were sacrificed. The victims were even burned alive. In Sparta, during annual ceremonies, young boys were fiercely beaten until their blood, falling on Artemis' feet, was claimed to please the goddess. Thus, it was in Ephesus, the biggest city in Asia Minor, where Artemis had the largest number of devotees. In 625 BCE, a temple for her was built, but soon after, it was destroyed by the Cimmerians, who raided and plundered the area. The fire also destroyed the wooden statue of Artemis. Her later statues were made of stone. Between 564 and 540, on the remains of the old temple, a new, bigger and mighty one was constructed. It outshined all others with its greatness. It was 4 times bigger than the Parthenon in Athens. The stone roof was supported by 127 columns, 20 meters high each. The temple was called one of the 7 wonders of the world. One night, an Ephesian shoemaker, Herostratos, in the need for his name to be remembered by future generations, set fire to the temple. Soon, the arsonist was caught, sentenced to death, and damnatio memoriae, the curse of oblivion, was put on his name. While visiting Ephesus at that time, Alexander the Great offered to rebuild the temple, but the Ephesians gently opposed, claiming that one god cannot build a temple for another god. Between 334 and 260 BCE, a new temple emerged, and until its demise, it was the greatest temple of its time. Situated on the headland of the river Kaistros, it was three-sidedly surrounded by its floatable waters. The sight must have been mind-blowing. The doomsday of the sanctuary came together with the Goths, who destroyed it completely. The once greatest temple was never to be rebuilt again. Later, some stone parts coming from the temple were used to raise the St. John's Basilica on Ayasuluk Hill, in what is now the town of Seljuk, 3 kilometers away from Ephesus. Artemis itself was a very old goddess, with her worship in Anatolia long before the coming of the Greek. Her cult was immense. As a lady of natural world, Artemis of Ephesus had a large number of bumps on her body, claiming to be breasts, but scientists argue about it to this day. Some experts say that these bumps are the symbol of flowing honey. As in the best period for Ephesus, coins with the likeness of a bee on the reverse were minted. Hunters and farmers used to hang little shrines in woods for her. People prayed to her for health and abundance, and in return she was offered votive gifts in her temples. Artemis' holy day was the 13th of August. On that day, her statue was carried along the city streets. Holy and thankful songs were sang. Flowers were tossed on the street in processions. Boisterous funs and dances were held with wine and plenty of food. The scent of flowers filled the air, and one of the sources of income for the citizens were souvenirs connected with Artemis. According to written sources, during the germination of Christianity, Demetrius, a goldsmith producing religious souvenirs, started a rebellion, fearing that the followers of a new and dangerous religion pose a threat to his business. St. Paul, while visiting Ephesus, called to stop worshipping false gods and not buy souvenirs created by mortal human beings. Not only in Ephesus but elsewhere did the production of religious gifts bring considerable profits. The upheaval soon died down, and Christianity flourished on in Asia Minor. Interesting as it may be, that majority of religious followers to this day eagerly purchase religious gifts made by other mortal human beings, and it is not shocking anymore. Together with the onset of Christianity, great polytheistic religions with their plethora of deities vanished in the depths of time. Currently, humanity lives in a transitory period between the beginning of the end of world religious doctrines, and we are looking at the formation process of something completely new. For a few decades, an array of revolutionary views on human inner self have been coming to existence in the place of formalized religious structures. These views place us in the middle of the whole universe with our talents and abilities, stating that every person is responsible for their own fate, and the only thing that hinders it is the way we think about the surrounding world. This new psychological approach, which transfers the whole responsibility to our own lap, poses a huge threat to many of us, which in turn makes us stay within the grasp of religious dogmas and moral rules thousands of years old.